So good morning. Welcome again. As we said, cybersecurity at 7:30 in the morning. It's kind of an interesting topic, but it's an important topic. Right? And some people ask why we're doing it. We don't have cybersecurity services. We just think it's important and a value add for our business clients and customers to understand what the risks are and understand that there's actually some things that you can do, right? Take the mystery out of it a little bit, and there's some things you can do to greatly improve your chances. No different than if you had a home, and I've talked about this in the past, and a robber walks into a neighborhood and he sees a home that has lights on and a sign outside that says there's an alarm system and there's a barking dog pieces. And I look across and there's one that has no lights on, no sign, and no barking dog. I'm more likely to go next door. Very similar on what a cyber criminal is going to do. They'll look for the easiest way in and the quick fixes. So if you can do some simple things to protect your businesses, no different than locking your doors. You wouldn't leave a car unlocked in a parking lot, right? And those are the ones that are often done. The same thing. I'm not going to go through the effort of breaking in if I can open the door and get in and steal it. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to John as an introducer speaker who's going to talk about some of those things that we can do. But we wanted to welcome you here to Ulster Savings.
Thank you. I also wanted to introduce Greg Jocelyn. Greg Jocelyn is our head of IT here at the bank. Afterwards, if you have questions for Carl or Greg, feel free to ask. We as a bank are required to do a lot more than you probably are in your businesses, and so it gives us a little bit of experience. Carl Cadragari is the Executive Vice President of FoxPoint Solutions. FoxPoint is a division of Bonadillo, the Bonadillo Group. Bonadillo is our internal auditors. Carl comes in and abuses Greg and I once a year and does all kinds of testing and makes sure that we're compliant with everything. Carl does a phenomenal job of pointing out weaknesses that we have, if there are any, and then reports it to our board in a way that the board can easily understand it. We just thought he would be the perfect person to spend a little bit of time on this topic. So I will turn it over to Carl. For those of you that are dog lovers, Carl also is a foster dog person who has fostered 60 dogs in his career, and like many fosterers, he tends to adopt more than he lets go after he has them. So
we currently have 4 foster failures.
I'll turn it over to Carl.
But yeah. Good morning, everybody. So first, thank you for spending some time. I will do my darndest to try and make sure none of you have to roll your eyes in the back of your head talking geek speak. Right? But if I do say something you don't understand or you don't want me to share a little bit more on it, please ask. Questions are always important. Okay? So please, if anything comes up, we had a question about Medicaid numbers and helping seniors. If you want some information on how to do that, I'll be more than glad to talk about that. But the presentation is just to kind of raise awareness a little bit. The first half of the presentation is going to talk about the market, talk about what's going on out there. And the second half of the presentation is going to talk about what you can do either personally or through your businesses to help protect your information. Okay? One of the interesting things about cybersecurity is everybody thinks it's hard. It's not. It's really about common sense. Like Bill mentioned, you lock your keys in your car, or your car unlocked with your keys in it, in your garage, on your driveway, you leave your door open. You know, if you have a home alarm system, you're talking about protecting yourself. We're doing the same thing here with cyber. So we're going to talk a little bit about the industry, some emerging threats that are out there, maybe some ones that you've seen or heard about. We're going to talk about the regulatory requirements. If you're part of a business, there are regulatory requirements in New York State. I'm going to skim over those just to give you a little bit of a header on that and what to expect. If you want more information, just reach out. We're glad to share more with you. That's not a problem. The framework we're going to talk about, what you need to do about the kind of tools that you need and what you should be doing first. As I mentioned, this industry is full of acronyms. There will be a test at the end of the presentation on all of these. Okay? So, no, just kidding. If I use an acronym, please, if you don't understand what it is, raise your hand, stop me. I'd be more than glad to explain. These are headlines. I pulled all of these off the internet last week. These are all current headlines. What you don't want to do is be one of these headlines. That's what we're talking about here. You want to avoid this. You want to have good headlines. What you did for the senior community that you're working with. How the organization has improved healthcare. What you've done in the banking world to improve client satisfaction. Those are the good headlines. You don't want these. Okay? This last one That's just one site out there. There's 27,000 headlines in it that are current. So now these are international and not just the US. But this industry is full of ways where the malicious individuals can try to attack you. They only have to find one entry point. That's it. You have to protect against all the entry points. You have to train your people to make sure they don't do things. You have to keep your systems up to date to make sure they're hardened. Those bad guys out there only need to find the one little area. And that's the one thing you always want to be concerned with. Almost as many people in the world have a mobile device attached to the network right now. 7 billion devices have internet attached right now. I have like 20 in my house. I swear to God. I have 2 laptops. I have 2 iPads. I have my cell phone. My wife has an iPad, a cell phone. My daughter, I have my Roku. My refrigerator is connected, so I can look at it, make sure everything's okay. I could do it with my wash and dryer too if I wanted. This is crazy. I mean, the number of devices that are attached to the internet out there is causing this additional issue for everybody. Does anybody have any self-service machines in your organization where people swipe a credit card through? Okay, or anything like that? That's becoming more prevalent for people. Okay? That is actually attached to the network, and it sends across your network information back to the card brands. So that's an area that's being attacked by a lot of entities. Because it's easy to break in because a lot of the codes are not that secure. Anybody heard the term ransomware? Anybody not heard it? Okay, so ransomware is a malicious piece of software that usually attacks your computer and encrypts everything in the computer, encrypts your data. Okay? Ransomware has gotten very, very intelligent. By that I mean it will look at your computer and then look inside your computer to see what other computers are attached to the network and jump from yours to another one. Okay? No longer is it just an individual who has to sit there once they've broken in and do things. The ransomware has gotten smart enough where it can actually bounce around inside your systems, okay, and affect other devices. It doesn't mean it isn't launched by an individual. It doesn't mean that you can't protect yourself. Ransomware needs 2 things. It needs a human to do something. Click on a link, download a file, open a page, put some information in, and the computer itself has to be able to accept that. If you train your users really well on what the ransomware attacks look like, so those phishing attacks, those kind of things, all right, and then you also have those computer protections we're going to talk about here in a few minutes, then you have a lower chance of getting ransomware. I usually get a question right now is, what if we have really good backups? Okay? That is a fantastic thing to have, unless they're online. Because what the ransomware will do now is it will sit in your network, collect all your passwords that go across your network, including your backup passwords, and then it will encrypt your backups as well. All right? So, I used to say, you want to have your tapes taken off site, your hard drives taken off site, all the rest of that. That's that air gap. I used to do that. I used to say that 10 years ago. I'm coming back to it again. All right? If you have an air gap, then the ransomware can't jump. Okay? So something to be concerned with. Ransomware, for most of the standards that are out there, the laws and regulations, is considered a data breach at this point. Because most of them have changed their wording to unapproved access. Okay? And that's what ransomware is. You didn't ask for it. Okay? Someone tricked you. Okay? So be cautious if you do have a ransomware outbreak. Make sure that you talk to your cyber liability carrier and make sure that they can help protect you and tell you what you need to do if you do have something happen. I get asked a lot, do we ever pay? The answer to that question is, depends on how badly you've been infected. Right. Almost 98% of the time, if you get the decryption key that they sell you, right, you'll get your data back. It will decrypt your information. The reason why that is they want to continue to have people pay. So if it becomes public knowledge that the decryption key doesn't work, then people will stop paying anyways. But even if you do have to pay, chances are you're going to have to recover up to 14% of your information because it's been so damaged by the software. Questions so far? This one is serious right now. This one is probably the worst issue out there right now. And when I get to talk about phishing and a few other things here in a minute, you see how it gets into the environment as well. This one is really scary. You no longer have to be a geek to use ransomware. You can buy a kit. Just like you buy Microsoft Office, just like you buy Adobe, just like you buy Word, anything else. You can actually buy the kit and point it to an organization, hit enter, and it does it for you. It starts the attack. It does everything. That's that smart ransomware I was talking about. These organizations, even though some of them have help desks, in case it doesn't work right. It's not illegal to sell it. It's illegal to use it. So that's really crazy about this. Right? So no longer is it just a malicious individual that you don't know. Now you have to start being worried about potential, dissatisfied employees. People have been terminated for cause. Something else like that, where they can go out to the internet and buy this kit and literally just run it against you. They don't have to do anything. The way it works is the person running it usually gets 40% of the proceeds if it gets paid, and 60% of the proceeds go back to the ransomware kit developer. That's the agreement that the individual signs. So, you ever heard phishing? That email stuff, those email tricks that people try to do against you? This is smishing. So smishing is really interesting because it's gone away from email particularly and started attacking these things. Your cell phone. You get a text message from Venmo. You've been awarded $500 because of your great customer service with Venmo. They're not going to give you $500. Okay? The one I get a lot recently is the Amazon package has been rerouted. Please click here to let us know what you'd like to do. And they ask you for your password and your login information. And your Amazon account is tied to what? Credit card. That's what they're after. They're after the credit card information. All right. I've seen, tricks for seniors who have smartphones as well. Your computer's been infected. Please dial here, call us, and let us know what's going on. We'll help you fix it. Okay. And then they get into your computer and they steal information. So smishing is becoming more and more popular as an attack vector. Because how many people just open the text message and just click things? Looks legit. Looks like it's Amazon. Looks like it's PayPal. Looks like it's Venmo. So always, whenever you get something that doesn't look right, okay, just delete it and then get on your site uniquely. Don't go through the smish, through the text message, and go look and see if there's anything really there. I will bet 100% of the time it won't. By the way, the bank will never send you a text message saying, hey, your account has an issue. Please click here to log in. They'll say, hey, your account has an issue. Call us. Okay? So don't ever click something that says log in here from a text message. Not a good idea. Viruses, malware. So viruses break computers. Okay? They do something to really make your computer not work. Okay? Malware steals information. That's the difference between the two. Right? Malicious software, malware, is the worst one that you want to ever have exposed by. You want to be able to protect yourself from that. I usually say if you have $100 to spend on antivirus and anti-malware software, you spend $99.95 on anti-malware software. Because that's the protection one. Phishing is still a huge issue. You probably have filters on your email that stop a lot of the phishes, but they still come in. Okay? It's rare that an organization doesn't fall for a phish. Some organizations are really, really good at it, so they only have 1% people fall for it. The reality is all it takes is one. It's the reality. If one person falls for it and that attacker can get inside the network, that's a problem. Then the internal controls that are in place to help prevent it and help moderate it or mitigate it come into play. But if you can stop it, even getting to that point, that's spyware. Anybody else heard that term? A couple people? All right. So spyware, for those who haven't heard it, is software that sits on your computer and collects information as you do it and then sends it someplace else. It can be done via software, or it can actually be done by a little piece of hardware. So if you have a USB mouse and keyboard, There's an actual little USB key thing that you plug into one of the ports, the little square dongle thing. Right? I actually have one that has spyware on it. Your keyboard will still connect. I just plug it in, and as you type, it collects all that information. I can either have it emailed to me, or I can actually physically remove it and stick a new one back in, that real one. But when we do physical penetration tests, that's one of the things that we do. Okay? We'll put a spyware dongle, we call it, on people's machines, right, to see how much information we can collect. We make it very obvious. If the regular dongle is black, we make this one red. Okay? I mean, so it's not meant to fully trick somebody, but to make sure they're paying attention to things. Physical is as important as anything else. The reality is that that attacker can touch it, they probably own it, even if it's encrypted. It just takes a lot longer for them to get into the information. So if your cell phones have access to your email, have access to your own personal bank account, other business applications, and your cell phone gets stolen, okay, eventually the person can get into that, even if you have a passcode on it or other things, or facial rec. Okay. So protecting those devices is very, very important. There's something called mobile device management software that's out there that helps protect it and allow you to wipe it. You know, and usually I hear, well, if my cell phone gets stolen, I'll just call IT and they'll just wipe it. That assumes it's on the network. That assumes that the Wi-Fi is turned on, or the wireless is turned on. First thing someone does is they turn that off. If they can't reach it from the cloud, or can't reach it from the Wi-Fi signal out there, you can't wipe it. So things to be concerned with for those type of physical devices. Administrative and technical items, so those policies and procedures. When we talk about the laws in a minute or two, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But you need to have documentation. Not everybody remembers everything in their head. You need something to refer to. An incident response plan, password policy. If you're using a third party for your IT, they need to have policies and procedures you can rely on. So definitely have that documentation in there as necessary as well. Vendors. Last year at this time, the single largest breach statistics out there were for individuals from the company. Your employees caused the most breaches. It's now switched to vendors. 52% of all the breaches notified last year were from a vendor. Reason being, they have more data. You may have 100 gig of data in your system, but your vendor you're using in the cloud has 100 of you. So they're a bigger target. And last year was the first year that it went over 50% on the vendor side. So your vendor management program, understanding what your vendors do, now becomes something very critical. Pick anything. Okay. Who has a $15 million IT budget? Anybody have more than $500,000? Yeah. So you have limited resources to help protect yourself. Unfortunately, sometimes the regulators don't understand that. You know, the people that are writing the laws don't understand that. Okay? So you do the best you possibly can. You do as much as reasonably as you possibly can. Okay? But these are all key areas where you want to look at things. Your software, is it being kept up to date? Your cell phones, do they have encryption on them? You know, if you're using laptops and items like that, are they encrypted? Okay. Making sure that you know what's going on in the environment will help. Any question? Definitely working with your IT company if you have an outsource to help you get as secure as possible without interrupting the business process is always something that's very important. Cell phone, laptop, tablet, BYOD, bring your own device. If COVID taught us anything, it taught us that remote work is incredibly possible. Okay? But a lot of organizations allowed the individuals in their company to use their own personal devices without understanding how secure they were. You need to get work done. Okay? You know, the cell phone I was talking about, the tablets I was talking about, all of those items. Okay? If it's not protected and it's lost and has access to your protected information, HR information, social security numbers, whatever, okay? Credit card information, email, if you're sending data in email, right? If it's lost or stolen, that is still a data breach, even though if it's owned by the individual, because you've given them access to your information. So something you have to be concerned with. So. The New York State SHIELD Act is probably one that applies to everybody here in the room The bank has 97 other regulators that they have to worry about. But chances are, if you haven't heard of this law, it's something you need to look up. Okay? So this basically is the protection of electronic information that is considered personally identifiable information that can be used in some type of a impersonation of an individual, or some type of a hack of an individual. So the things that you would think: credit card numbers, social security numbers, driver's license numbers, Medicaid numbers. Someone mentioned that earlier. These are protected pieces of data under the New York State Shield Act. This law actually was originally put into place in 2005. They updated it about 2 years ago, and they made it more stringent about the things that you have to do. The law does have a caveat in it for your size and complexity. So what I would expect the bank to do as their IT auditor is not something I would expect an organization to do if it's 5 people, if it's 10 people, if it's a small community organization. Right? So there is a level of flexibility in the rule. But they do want you to protect the information. And if your information does get compromised, again, unapproved access is considered a data breach. That is something you need to understand how you report it through the law. When you report it, it has to go to New York State Attorney General, to the New York State Police, okay? And traditionally, your cyber liability carrier, if you have it, and also the organizations that control your credit score, the credit score companies. They usually have to be informed as well. Anybody in here healthcare? Anybody else? Anybody else in here finance, or you work directly with consumers? A couple other ones? Okay. All right. So HIPAA is the healthcare law. All right. So HIPAA has been in place since '96. Okay. If you're working in the healthcare industry, you're dealing with, I think you said you're dealing with senior community individuals. Then that law also has these same type of requirements in it: breach notification, communication. Shield Act actually has a caveat in there for reporting. If you have to be HIPAA, then Shield Act actually changes the reporting timeline in there, because HIPAA is considered your major regulator, right? And you have to report 5 days after you report a HIPAA breach. If you're not HIPAA, you're just dealing with consumer information, then it's 10 days after you identify the breach has to be reported. So it's a little bit different. So understanding the rules and nuances in there is always important. GLBA is financial information, but it has to be financial information that's given over a period of time, not just like one thing. Okay. So if you're giving someone the ability to pay their bill over time, an individual, not a company, an individual to pay their bill over time, you could fall into this. Real estate entities, accounting firms, all of that. So, and then PCI is the credit card standard. It's not a law, it's a standard. So if you take credit cards, store, process, transmit, even if you do it with a third party, okay, if you're doing anything with that primary account number, then that's a standard that you would have to meet. So again, just being aware of what's out there that you have questions that you may have to be worried about. So, questions on any of those? For PayPal? Oh, PayPal's fantastic. Yeah. Okay. I mean, if you outsource your whole credit card processing to PayPal, the chances of you having concern or an issue with them is minor. Okay. They have fantastic controls in place. They do a really good job communicating. They are very secure with their account processes. They get audited more often than these guys do. Okay. I mean, it's pretty incredible. One more time. So that's a processor. That's different than PayPal. Okay. So PayPal is the back end, I guess you would call it. The credit card, the companies that process the information would use a PayPal potentially to communicate back to you, or you would do it from an individual consumer standpoint. Okay. But there are other processors out there. Other than I don't know if they've been owned by them. as close as. Yeah. So, still, you're still talking about if it's a bank, as long as it's not Silicon Valley Bank, you should be okay. So. All right, so sky is falling, right? Too much to do. Where do I start? So this is where I'm going to start talking about things that you probably should be looking at and looking at doing, okay, part of the presentation. Risk assessment. HIPAA requires it. SHIELD requires it. Graham-Bliley requires it. Just about every standard out there that's associated with data protection law, including PCI that's standard, requires a risk assessment. I usually get the question, well, what do I do? What is a risk assessment? You're looking at your information from an aspect of where there could be risks to it. Remember I said administrative before, physical, technical? Those are the areas you want to look at. Do I have enough documentation so that everybody in my organization knows what they're supposed to do with me? Do I give people security awareness training? Have I put a vendor management program in place? Okay. Where are my risks there? Do I have enough information to know what's happening? Technical. Do I have really good antivirus? Do I have anti-malware? Do I have a filter on my website, okay, so that we're collecting information, okay, appropriately? Is my privacy policy posted on my website? Right? For the healthcare, is my notice of privacy practices posted on my website? So technical stuff. And then the physical. Can someone walk into my organization and take something they're not supposed to? Every company is different. Obviously, it's very difficult to walk through the bank here. Okay, you can walk to the teller line, getting to the IT department, which is on the lower floor, behind 3 different doors. It has to have a key code. Yeah, it's really difficult to get there. But is there a way for someone to take something? Okay? It's not unusual for me to get phone calls from some of our healthcare clients where they've lost a laptop out of their ED, okay, the emergency department. Or someone has walked off with one of the laptops from one of the computer on wheels that was on the floor. Right? So is there a risk there? Sure. Okay. What do you do to mitigate it is the risk item. So a risk assessment talks about what you have to look at, where you have to look at it, and what your responsibilities are for the information. And then you identify those areas and you rank them. Okay. How likely is this to happen? Okay. And if it does happen, what's the impact? So if someone steals a laptop that's not logged into, do you have a password on it? Is it encrypted? So even if they steal it, they can't get in it. And if they can get in it, they can't get to the information on the hard drive. If they pull the hard drive out, try to stick it in another computer, it's still encrypted. They still can't get to it. Okay. So you're reducing your risk profile by looking at where the risk is and what you've done to mitigate it. Then it's likelihood. How often could you potentially get a virus? Daily? Hourly? Okay. If you don't have antivirus software, it means you're going to be breaking computers. Okay. So viruses happen a lot. Malware, ransomware. How often could you potentially get a ransomware attack? Weekly? Monthly? Depending on your business and how public it is, will depend on those frequencies as well. If nobody knows about you, chances of you getting attacked are pretty slim. If somebody knows about you, chance of getting attacked is pretty high. And if you end up in the news for any of those negative ones, you'll absolutely be attacked. No ifs, ands, or buts, because you've already shown that you have some weaknesses. And then the final impact. You take the likelihood, you take the occurrences, you take the output, and you decide what the impact is to the organization. However you want to do the risk assessment is fine. There are tools out there that are available that give you risk assessment programs and platforms. Just Google risk assessment worksheet, and you'll get a bunch of them, and that'll help walk you through things. But this is probably the most key document you should have, because this drives everything else you need to do. Does anybody have a 20-character password in here that they use and change every 90 days? Anybody? A couple of people? Okay. Great. All right, that's fantastic. Anybody have a 6-character one? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, there you go. Okay. So my favorite story of all about passwords was I was auditing an organization, and they had a database administrator. That was part of the software that they were building internally for themselves. We walked up and we were auditing, we're looking at access controls and performance and stuff. And I noticed all of his passwords were literally handwritten on a sticky note on the side of his monitor. Okay, we're like, yeah, I can't do that. That's not good. So we wrote it up. Okay, they said they would fix it. Came back a year later. Walk in the database office. The person is still there, but no passwords. That's fantastic. Okay, we need to see the interface. Could you log into this database? He goes, great. Okay, we would walk through the interface. We did a testing interface. Okay, we need to see this one. Log into that one. He goes, what's the passwords on the ceiling? Swear to God. Well, yeah, definitely. For the rest of their controls, you don't. That's the other thing. Browser passwords and Google and stuff. Okay, if it's not attached to something personal about you, not a big deal. But if it's attached to something that has your credit card or something in it, don't save it there. But browser saved passwords is always a challenge for every organization. If they allow it in the organization. But this literally was a highly regulated entity, and that just wasn't right. It just wasn't right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Which has happened the past 2 months ago. LastPass was hacked 2 months ago. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't use something like that. The chances of that happening again, okay, are pretty slim. But if it does happen, okay, you have to understand that your passwords are potentially compromised. Okay? There's no such thing as perfect security. Nothing. Okay. My wife uses LastPass for her computer, and after the breach came out, she goes, "Should I continue to use it?" I said, "Did we get notified our information was compromised?" She said, "No." I said, "Then don't worry about it." There's no such thing as perfect. The LifeLock guy. Remember his ads? He used to put his social security number up on billboards and stuff? He had his identity stolen 6 times. Okay. So there's no such thing as perfect. Like I said, those vendors are huge targets. Okay. That's really what it comes down to. Again, that's your risk assessment is like, how comfortable am I with this? What's the potential of occurrence? Okay, and what is it attached to? So I literally write down all my passwords. Every single one of them. I only have 6 that I have to keep that have anything to do with me. They are on a piece of paper in my wallet. This is where my credit cards are too. So if this gets stolen, I know it immediately. I know I have to go change my passwords. Okay? So, and all my passwords are associated with key comments and key questions and all the rest of that stuff. But everything else I use that isn't associated with something personal for me or my family, I use the same password. Snoopy. SN00P exclamation point. I don't care. There's nothing in there. My Hotmail account. There's nothing in my Hotmail account. I don't care. Right? So passwords are definitely a necessary item, but only again for the risk associated with the individual and what you're doing. I don't have any personal information on my Instagram account other than my name and a whole bunch of pictures of wine. Okay? The same thing with my Facebook account. My LinkedIn account isn't anything personal other than work stuff. Okay? So I control what's out there. The moment you buy something on Facebook with your credit card, you're giving Facebook your credit card. Same thing with Instagram. You go to buy something or whatever else. Okay? That's what you have to remember. You control your data. Email. Free versions of any email system are not secure. Okay? There's no expectation of privacy with any of them. Okay? In fact, Google was sued, I want to say, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and they came right out and said, hey, all our paperwork says no expectation of privacy for the free version. Now, the enterprise versions are different. They do have expectations. They do have controls. There is security in there. Okay. But the free versions are meant to be used to market to you. Send yourself a Gmail note about this great new boat you saw, and then log into your Facebook account 15 minutes later, and you'll get ads for boats. Okay? That's what they do with the information. That's why it's free. There's the browser version of Outlook, and then there's the app version of Outlook, and the app version of Gmail. The browser version of Outlook is much more susceptible to breaches than the app version. Okay? So if you're going to use one, use the app version. So again, look at your risks. Can we afford email? Whatever a cost is for your business. Okay? If the answer is no, and it truly is no, right, then you use the free version with a full understanding of what your risks are. Healthcare can't use the free version of Gmail or the free version of Exchange. Okay? It's against HIPAA rules because it states in there no expectation of privacy, and privacy is a key consideration for HIPAA. So think about that. Data protection, access controls, no generic accounts. If you have a third-party IT organization, a managed service organization that is controlling your environment, so they have all the keys to the kingdom, it's called domain administrator account. They can get into anything in your computers. Those accounts need to be associated with an individual, not the company. Okay? If it's ABC Computers Support or us, dot whatever your domain name is, that isn't associated with an individual. Anybody at that company can use that account to get in, and you can't prove if somebody specifically within that service provider did something to your account if they are compromised, or if you're compromised. There's no forensics real ability there. Again, the rules that we talk about with laws and regulations are the same thing. Unique identification. That includes your domain people if you've hired a third party. Unique passwords. I'm going to pick on HIPAA because it's an easy one to pick on. Right? HIPAA says every single person has to be uniquely identified to access protected health information. So you could use their name and their social security number as the password. That meets the letter of the law. Is that good security? No. Okay? So again, think of what it needs to look like for you. Passwords that expire. I almost always get the question right now that comes out that someone says, well, NIST says I don't have to use an expiring password anymore. And that's true. But there are 12 other caveats before you get to that point of the other controls that have to be in place before you get there. Do you have to use an expiring password or passphrase or complex password or whatever else? Not if you meet all these other characteristics. So, yeah, password expiration is a key one, because it allows you to add additional protections. And if anybody hasn't done it yet, go out to the dark web or go out to Pond, okay, and see what passwords of yours have been compromised. Okay, you have a question? Okay, sorry. And see if there's anything out there that you need to be concerned with. So if I use Snoopy all over the place, it's been compromised all over the place. I don't care. Okay. But I will never use Snoopy at one of my internal or my sensitive accounts. So are your people using a compromised password for any of your internal accounts? Something you need to know. Yes? So, safe is, again, relative. There are lists that can be purchased on the dark web. It's basically, okay, I don't want to get too geeky, but basically there's systems called Tor and other things that you can use to get to the dark web from. They're a way to get to sites that aren't published. So the internet, when you type in www.google.com, okay, Google has published that for everybody. The dark web has sites like Google, okay, but they don't publish it. And the way you get to it is by using those tools or knowing the actual URL. Okay, but you can't put in Google, go to dark web to find my password. It won't show you the actual sites. You have to actually know them. Okay, There are organizations out there that will do that search for you for the company. Okay? It's usually about $500 to do the whole company. Okay? I'm not pitching anything particularly, but if you want to know more, I can get you some names and some entities that can do it for you. Okay? And they buy the list and they get the information for you. That way you can do it anonymously. It's not you looking for it. Multi-factor authentication. Anybody do that? I would. No. So those two factors. iPhone with your face. Okay, you put a password in there somewhere, then your facial recognition on top of it. That's multi-factor. Right? It's something you know, something you are, and something you have are the three factors. So something you know is a password. Something you are, facial, thumbprint, whatever. And something you have is like one of those little key fob things that has a rotating number on it. You have to put in within 10 minutes. Okay. And if you goof it up once, you have to wait for it to cycle to put it in again. That kind of thing. So those are the three factors. Multi-factor authentication allows a higher level of protection for someone accessing your accounts. Can it be spoofed? Yes. Is it difficult to spoof? Absolutely. Okay. But if you've already logged into the account, like the seniors being compromised, okay, already logged into the account, the person's sitting there on the phone, and you give remote control to them at that point, then MFA didn't do you any good. The other thing with multi-factor authentication, if you use a tool like Duo or Okta or something else like that, make sure the server or the account that accesses the Duo administrative console also has multi-factor authentication. So we actually had an organization that had great MFA through their whole organization except for their Duo server. That server was compromised first. We removed MFA from everything else and then got into everything else. So that's a lesson learned for them. It could be in-house or off-prem. In the cloud. The Duo people, most of the managed service providers around here would offer something like that, either a Duo or an Okta or whatever, or you can go directly to the organization. You should be able to do it locally if you're just yourself. Yeah. If you're on your own personal accounts. You can put a Duo server on-prem if you have a big enough environment, or you use Duo on the cloud. Either or. But like Greg was saying, the 10-person one is just free. Data encryption. Shield, HIPAA, Grammarly, and all those standards out there, they say if it's encrypted and it's compromised, it's not a breach. Okay? So data encryption is a fantastic safe harbor. The only one out there that talks about even if it's encrypted and compromised is PCI, the credit card standard. That still has to be reported. Okay? But if you have one of those cell phones or a laptop or something and it's been encrypted and it's stolen, it's not considered a data breach. Okay? So data encryption is something that's very important to use on all devices. So it comes normally on your laptops. You buy Microsoft Office, the version that has, there's versions that have it and don't have it. BitLocker, it's called, in Microsoft. But you can also buy a third-party encryption tool. Your email should be encrypted as well if it has sensitive information in it. Okay. And then definitely your vendors that you're working with, if they have your sensitive information, you absolutely need to confirm that they're using data encryption. So we talked about antivirus and anti-malware. There's other products out there that go above and beyond that, where they will actually report on something that's attacked your computer. and actually defend against it and help you work through the forensics and help you work through the process. They're usually called endpoint protection products, managed detection services, things like that. Most entities, especially smaller businesses, they tend to be fairly expensive. So having really good antivirus and really good anti-malware is a minimum expectation. I know I'm harping on it a lot because of all the issues with third parties. While good antivirus and anti-malware is good for you, your third party, if they have a bunch of views, they should have those other endpoint protection tools in their environment because they have the keys to your kingdom and their equipment and their people. Web filtering, that's pretty standard right now with most web devices. Anything that you're putting out there, your firewall. If you have a third party build your website, there's web filtering that they usually put in front of it, making sure that that's on and making sure that's effective. Spam filtering, that's for that whole idea of protecting against phishing. So there are services out there that those spam filters connects to that say, hey, all of these locations are known spammers and they can't get in. But that doesn't mean they'll protect you from all of them. So you still have to be cautious of clicking links and opening things on your devices. Whitelisting is something a little bit different. If you only deal with people in New York State and your computers, then why is all the IPs in China allowed to connect to your computer? All the IPs in Europe, all the IPs in South America, doesn't matter. So if you only are dealing with people in New York, then whitelisting only the United States helps keep those other ones from coming at you in those other countries. Now, if your firewall is capable of doing that, something your service provider, your IT person can do, is something to look into. That reduces your footprint that could potentially attack you. We talked about vendor management a ton, okay? I'm just going to talk about it just a little bit more, just to make sure that everybody understands. There are ways to have your vendor prove that they're doing the right things. Right? These independent reports that I'm talking about in this one is particularly important. There's a couple of different reports that they can give you. One is called a SOC report, SOC. And for cybersecurity, you want a SOC 2 type 2. Okay? That has them being audited against a bunch of controls. And they have to pass those audits in order to generate a report that they give to you. That's one type of independent report that's about cyber and security. Another one is the ISO reports, the International Standards Organization, 27001. That's a certification. But any independent report that they give you is better than just saying, yeah, we're good, we got you covered. Okay? Doesn't mean you don't trust the organization, but just confirming it with them is an important part. And if they don't have a SOC report, you're absolutely allowed to send them a list of, hey, tell me what your policies and procedures are, tell me what your security controls are, look at your service level agreement, see where the responsibilities are. Understanding your vendor environment and what they do with your information is critical. And it's not just your managed services IT. It could be your payroll provider, it could be your benefits administrator, your TPA, your third-party administrator, any of those. If they have access to your personal information and interact with it in any way, you should know what they're doing with it and how they protect it. So, since the possibility is there for every organization to potentially have an incident, you should test your plan. You should have it documented, again, one of those administrative items, but you should also be testing your plan. Okay? Sit around the table, talk about a potential scenario, talk about who would do what and when, look at the incident response program, that document. Again, another one that's very readily available online, okay, so don't worry about that. And just see what you would do. See if there's anything unique about your environment that you have to be aware of. Those tabletop tests is what they're called traditionally. Give you an idea of how you have to react, when you have to call your cyber liability carrier, when you're going to need to call your attorney, okay? When you're going to need to call the regulators, okay? Those kind of things. That way you have it practiced before you have a potential incident. It's really so you don't have to hit the panic button if you do have something happen. This is another one that's important so that you just know what's going on if you do have to deal with it. Cyber liability coverage, if you don't have it, definitely something you need to explore. The average data breach right now is a little over $5 million in cost. So cyber coverage of at least that amount would be something you potentially would want to look at. Cyber coverage is interesting. Okay? You need to be very specific in the cyber coverage when you have it and understand the declarations and the exceptions and the definitions. It's something to be very, very cognizant of when you get your plan. Sometimes, if you have a $5 million policy and the premium's $1,000 a year, there's something in there that isn't right. Okay? If you have a $5 million policy and your premium's $50,000 a year, well, that's outrageous. That's too much. Okay? So making sure you understand everything that's covered in the documentation and your plan is very important. Sometimes you'll see exceptions where it's common to see, foreign actor exceptions, war exceptions, time of war, those kind of things. But it's not common to see ones where it only covers you for 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. I'm just making that up. But understanding what those exceptions are is important. All those other controls we talked about before, passwords, multi-factor authentication, vendor management, the account review, the risk assessment, all those other protections are going to be the minimum expectations for you to have before you get cyber. Because they're going to have you fill out an application, and those are the questions they're going to ask you. Do you use unique passwords? Do you have multi-factor authentication? Do you do risk assessments? Do you do penetration testing? Okay, other things like that. And if you check no's on a bunch of those, chances of actually getting coverage are going to be lower. No question. There's always going to be an exception list. Somewhere in the organization there's going to be an exception. Whether it be this person laptop never shuts off, doesn't have the screensaver that pops up because they're just too busy, can't take the time. And you've approved that. Management has approved that that's okay. That doesn't mean it should always be okay. There's always going to be exceptions. Making sure that they're reviewed and carry a higher risk so that everybody understands is important. Information security should not get in front of the business process unless it absolutely has to. Sometimes those exceptions fall inside that business process requirement for a specific amount of time. Classic example is, those little thumb drives, the hard drives, the thumb drives that have mass storage on them. A lot of companies say that's not allowed except for the marketing department. Because the marketing department doesn't have any access to personally identifiable information. Okay? So that would be a reasonable exception for an organization. But something you look at every single year to make sure, and something you test to make sure that somebody in the marketing department didn't go to IT and the user access information didn't get changed. So watching out for exceptions is always very critical. Last slide. Be skeptical. Like I said, Venmo's not going to send you $500 via text message. It's not going to happen. Okay. If it doesn't look right, it probably isn't. So it'll caveat emptor, buyer beware kind of thing. Making sure you're aware of your online presence. The guys who fish, the people that try and fish you, the first thing they do is look for online information. We had an organization in Maine that the CFO, her name was Catherine, okay, with a C, but everything she did was Katie with a K. Okay? So internally, all her emails and everything else like that. Okay? Her LinkedIn profile was Katie with the company that she worked for. The controller got a message from Katie that the merger they were going through required them to send $400,000 to this law firm so that they could proceed with the rest of the merger. Thank you very much, Katie. Oh, by the way, here's the lawyer's phone number. They're going to be calling you at Tuesday between 2 and 3 o'clock to confirm the transfer. It was all set up. 400 grand in the door. Wasn't her. The person who got that request looked logical. They were in the middle of a merger. They were using a firms. All the rest of it looked logical. They just did it without checking. With that online presence, it didn't come as Catherine. It came as Katie. Okay, it was one of the things that helped that person get tricked. Your online presence is something to be very cautious of. Don't click links if you don't know what they are. Okay. You get a pop-up on your screen, okay, and you put your mouse pointer on it, and your mouse pointer is a hand, not an actual pointer. You want to delete that from the bar, the search bar on the bottom. Okay, because if it's still the hand, chances are you might be downloading something to your computer. It could be a cookie, it could be something innocuous, but it could also be malicious software. Software updated, patches. Don't keep hitting ignore on your computer when you get your updates. Okay, let the computers patch. Okay, that's an important thing. Okay. Cell phone too, your BIOS updates and iOS updates and all the rest of that. Let those happen. Okay. And be active. We hear about cyber issues every single day. We hear about you can't pick up a newspaper, you can't go online, you can't do anything without hearing about someone who's had a cyber breach. It's causing apathy, but don't let it cause it for you or for your people. It's important that everybody's part of that strategy. And the risk assessment, again, that's your starting point. It's not a one and done. As your business changes, you redo the risk assessments. If you change major vendors, do a risk assessment for the new vendor, that kind of information. Questions?